And the next discussion topic has already come up quite a bit in our first panel and over the last couple days, so clearly going to be among the hottest public policy areas in 2024. We're so excited to hear from an incredible panel of experts on artificial intelligence. Our moderator is Tammy Haddad, a media innovator and veteran television executive. And former executive producer who's been leading many conversations on AI at Haddad Media. She devises winning strategies for clients, including some of the world's top media companies, technology disruptors, innovative startups, and nonprofit organizations. So please welcome Tammy and our great panel.
Sorry, I'm a TV producer, so I have to move the chairs in a proper place. Can you make this closer? Do you mind making it closer? Hi, Alex. I'm so glad that you. Have you guys met before? Thank you. Hello. Hi, everyone. How are you? Good morning. Sorry, I didn't hear them. Did you? Good morning. It's so good to be with all of you. Let's hear it for Helen and the team. Isn't this great? I have to say, I walked in the door and I said, I don't think I've ever been sober at this hotel. I don't think I've ever been here before 11 p.m., but it's really lovely. Right? Excellent, excellent. All right. So, by the way, it's always
the quote of the conference.
Exactly. It's always good to be in a room with a former president. Did everyone see Ian Khan today? That's always a good way to start. All right. It took government 30 years to regulate phones, 20 for radio, 5 for TV, and 10 for the internet. First quiz. Who remembers what year the last internet legislation was? Anyone know? You can't say, Alex, because you're who? 96. Yay, you win the prize. You get, a Chat GPT account, right, Helen? Isn't that what we said we'd give out? Okay, how many have used Chat GPT? Ooh, very impressive. How about Midjourney? 2, 3. Sorry, ma'am. What about Pictory? You guys got to get to work. It's a good thing we're here. And right now, what we're dealing with, every level of government is trying to figure out how to handle AI, what to do. But AI is going to change everything we do in our life. You know that, how you live, how you love, how you raise your kids, how you work. So this is the most important conversation this morning. Sorry, with all due respect to elections, because elections are the most important decision, I think. I want to hear what you guys have to say about AI. Was anyone here at the White House when President Biden announced the executive order on AI? And do you remember what he said? The U.S. is leading the way. And it's so important that we keep that positioning. And all of you, this is what your job is, to lead the way. So in July, I'm a longtime TV producer. Did you guys ever watch MSNBC? CNN? Okay, so I've been around, I just want to say. And like Dick Cheney, I decided to name myself the head of the Washington AI Network, because I just said, why not? And the reason is it's so important to bring people together and talk about these issues and understand it. Now, we had Senate Majority Leader Schumer. He started these inside forums. Were you guys at any of those? So it was such a grand idea. You got Mark Zuckerberg standing next to the head of the AFL-CIO. You've got Elon Musk with Maya Wiley. You guys know Maya Wiley. I asked her about that. I'm like, did you stare him down? How'd that go? She's like, he stayed on the other side of the room, right? But if you think about it, it is historic that these conversations are taking place in this very politicized time. You've got Republicans and Democrats who are working together at all different levels, and it is on all of you. So I'm here to help you. I want all of you to start your own AI network, because you can't let this technology take over. Those who embrace it, you look at the history of this country, those who embrace technology first, they win. Their constituents win, their family wins. So this is what you have to do. Now, here's the good news. We've got 3 people here who've been working on this for years. So they're going to help us figure out the best way for you to use the power you have in the office you have today to make a big difference. So next to me, I have to be honest, I'm not going to hug her in front of you, is Miriam Vogel, head of the EqualAI, president and CEO. She's the head of the President's National AI, NIAC, AI Advisory Committee. She's instead of it. Let's hear it from Miriam. Okay. And then Kumar and I go way back. I actually brought, this is probably a bad crowd to say it, but I'll say it. I brought all the Miss America contestants to the White House during the Obama administration because we had this STEM program, and he has done more for women in STEM. You guys should really give him a round of applause. Now, Alex is an assemblyman from New York. Alex, I'm so glad to meet you because right now you're trying to get those guys in Albany to figure out what AI is. Right? How's that going?
It depends on the day. Yeah, I'm the first Democrat elected in New York at any level with a degree in computer science. It's a master's degree with a specialization in machine learning. And that means the most frequent question I get from my colleagues in Albany is, how do I fix my iPhone? But everyone is interested in AI now. It's the topic on everyone's mind. Everyone wants to throw a bill out there about it. But we need to be very thoughtful in the conversations that we have around AI. That doesn't mean we restrict it to just people with technology backgrounds. I think the values that everyone brings are going to be important in these conversations, but we certainly need to be understanding the technology before we're legislating it. Okay,
Kumar, where have things, I mean, you've been working on this for a long time. Where are we? Remember, all of the folks in this room have the constituents, they have their own audience. What is the best way to embrace it now? I'm not saying AI is everything. I'm just saying, what is the best way to start bringing it into success, really?
Yes, I mean, the analogy I always make is there's all these great clips going around like 1993, 1994, with people say like, do I really need a website? You know, there's all these quotes. There's like companies. It's like, why would we need a website? Or like politicians kind of mocking it. And the question is like, you know, what's going to be the clip of people mocking this thing 20 years from now, being like, do I really need to figure this out? I mean, these tech people get excited about blockchain, and they get excited about this thing. Like, it's always something you guys are excited about, and then it passes by, right? And so my sort of advice are basically 3 things for what you can do, even when you don't know the future, whether this is going to be a big deal, it's going to be a fad. I think first one is talent, which is you got to have someone on your team that actually knows, fingers on keyboards, what is going on, right? Because if all you're getting your information is like, I hear about it, I go to these meetings, or you know, I have some lobbyists come in and they say it's a big deal, and I have somebody else come in and say it's going to kill us all. Like, you got to have somebody who's like, hey, I'm playing around with this right now, and here's what we tried to do. So number 1 is have somebody on your team that actually is playing around with it. Number 2 is have a culture of experimentation. There's a ton of like, it's going to solve everything, it's going to destroy everything, but the people who figured out the internet were the people who are trying to do stuff with it. Because then they were like, oh, I can actually do outreach to my constituents in this way. Oh, I can actually bring this in this really interesting way. So number 2 is experimentation. And number 3 is one big superpower you have as people try to figure out this AI thing is everybody's hungry for data. You know, these models work on data. So if you're the place that actually puts out really high quality data, the models will eat it and they'll want to work with you. So I always say like, hey, you're working with a set of farmers around how do we more effectively detect crop disease. You can actually build a data set of lots of images of crop disease in your area. People will say, oh, how can we partner? How can we build this into all these vision models? And that will bring people to you way more than, you know, like I'm going to build the next big technology. You often have the data that other people want to partner. So those would be my 3 practical ways to get started.
Okay, next to me, Miriam Vogel. Miriam has spent the last 5 years going around the world and saying, AI has to be fair, not just to women, not just to people of color, every single way that it should be fair and available to everyone. Big burden. How's that going?
Well, I'm grateful that everyone's now paying attention. So that's the biggest takeaway. The reason I'm most grateful for generative AI is what we've been saying for some time is now everyone's reality. We've been talking, thinking, fearing, wondering about the future. And it's here now. And so I think that it's wonderful that we have Tammy leading these conversations. We have you all participating because the bad news is, the good news is, you guys all have an outsized role in making sure that our democracy survives, not only because of the elections and the other areas you've talked about prior, but because all of that is impacted by the way that you will regulate and use and talk about AI, make sure that your communities are ready, are AI ready going forward.
What is the standard, or what should be the standard for the data, right? Because isn't the big question is what's coming in, right? And then we can talk about what's coming out of generative AI. You want to start, Alex?
It's a big question. You have to look at the data, but then you also have to look at the models themselves. I mean, it's definitely garbage.
But how do they know who the model is? I mean, how do they know what the model is? Is there, I mean, do you have that on a list? Is there someplace you can look that up on the internet?
On what the AI models are?
Yeah, no, but how where that data came from?
Is ask ChatGPT. Can actually explain a lot of these. And no, it's a learning tool that people don't think about doing that. Garbage in, garbage out applies obviously to these models, but you can have good data coming in and still get garbage out. Looking at doing bias audits, looking at the effects of decisions after the fact can help you identify, is this algorithm being applied in a way that is fair to everyone? And one of the best things about developing the science around these tests and the audits has been not just auditing models, but auditing people as well. So if you look at a bunch of training data and then you have a model that comes out and it's very biased, and the reason is because the data you put into the model is biased, if that data is all of the mortgage lending decisions you've made for the past 20 years, that's a chance to look at how you're making your mortgage lending decisions. And so these tests on bias can apply not just to the models, but to the humans as well.
If I could follow up on that, I'm so glad you made that point. It's such a great question. We are focused on the data. Yes, it is a key ingredient, but as you just heard, there's two basic ingredients when we're talking about AI. It's humans and it's data. Now, Tammy asked a good question. How do we know what the algorithm is? And we're talking about generative AI in particular. We're talking about a lot of models and data beyond what our brain can even fathom. But that's okay. We don't need to know every algorithm or every piece of data. What we need is a governance system. What we need is an expectation that you will have accountability. And that's where your role comes in. Right now, there's not clear real rules of the road. There is certainly regulation in place, and hopefully we can talk more about it. But what we don't have is standardized practices so that people know what is expected, so that a consumer can know, has this gone through the right checks, so that an employee knows, what am I supposed to be checking for, so that companies know what they're held account for at the end of the day. We call it good AI hygiene, and this is something where we all need to make a standard practice of a few concepts that no matter what type of AI you're using, you need to have these practices in place. We need to make sure that people have accountability. Who in the C-suite is going to answer these tough questions of whether the AI system has gone amok, whether it is biased, whether it is safe and efficient, for whom is it safe and efficient? We need to make sure you're documenting what is testing and what was tested, so that down the road, as AI passes hands across the globe, we understand what was and wasn't accounted for. We need to make sure there's constant iteration. AI will keep iterating. We need to make sure that your testing is ongoing. So these are the types of expectations we can put in place so that while we don't know all the data, and while we can expect the data and humans to have flaws, it's a reflection of our society. It will show our deficiencies, but we also have regulation and safeguards in place to make sure that we're accounting for them.
Kumar, can you talk about the regulations that are being discussed? I mean, I've talked to people from the FTC, Justice, DOT, you name every single agency, and what I hear 50% of the time is, hey, we already have regulations, we have laws in the books, we know how to handle these kinds of things, and then there's a whole other group that says, let's have this big giant AI agency, and that'll oversee all of these, that the policies will run through. Where are you on all this? Look, Alex is laughing. It's like, ha ha, he got that one.
Yeah. I think at a basic level, we don't really know.
Well, what do you think should happen?
Right. I think in general, the U.S. system, I mean, right or wrong, has been a disaster's first regulatory system. Like something bad happens, and then we say, well, why did this bad thing happen? We should fix it, right? That's sort of like the big difference between the U.S. system and the European system is, like the U.S. system has regulation follow harms versus try to say we can figure out all the harms. Now, it's a different risky system, but it has the advantage that it gives us a lot of upside on the innovation side. So I think the place where I often come to is the U.S. system benefits when the regulators are smart, right? Because the U.S. system starts with the harm first, it's like, do you want the big financial crisis and then we figure out that actually the financial system was operating on a ton of risk? Or is it that like as risk was building in the system, the regulators were sort of starting to realize it and moving onto it? And so I think that, so on the idea of like big new agency or small agency, I actually think that like, you know, we created the Department of Homeland Security. I don't know if like that changed anything, right? It was like, it was the one idea after 9/11 that people could grab onto. Like, hey, we didn't connect the dots, so let's build one big mega agency. You know, like, I don't know if that did, but then a lot of the reforms that the FBI did under the hood to actually integrate their data systems did make a big difference. So I mean, this is partly because I'm a policy nerd. Like, I think competence is really important, right? Making sure that the actual people inside the agencies, inside the regulators, actually know something about the technology that they're trying versus it's kind of this kind of like vibes regulation.
Okay, but wait, let me be the media person. I got to follow up on that. As the media person, I would say that government's really bad articulating the success they have or the policies they have. And I think in this time where there's so much doubt, forget the political part of it, but just doubt about any technology, let alone this technology that can so dramatically change your life. I think there has to be some sort of transparency or explanation or, you know, the European Commission, I love that pyramid they have. Has anyone seen the pyramid? They have this pyramid on AI that sort of lets you look at it and see this is what we're talking about. Because when we say AI, everyone here has a different view of what we're talking about, right? But I think that you have to explain to the public. Alex.
Yeah, well, on that note, raise your hand if you think you'd give a definition of AI. Come on, I'm not going to call on you. It's
I would call on you.
So that's part of it, right? We're having conversations about a lot of different things at the same time under the banner of AI. And so, of course, people, when you have a lack of trust, there's a challenge if we're not communicating exactly what we're talking about. And what we're talking about when we're regulating different pieces will be different aspects of it. You know, this is too strong, but it's almost like saying, let's regulate computers. Let's regulate tech. I mean, it's going to affect everything that we're doing. And so the question is, do we have a tech agency, or do we have, you know, CISA, which handles cybersecurity, and another agency which will handle another part? That's how AI might look as well. We're having many different conversations about many different things, but under one banner.
But on this transparency point, I actually think transparency is a really good core idea for where regulators can go to start. So one of the big debates that's happening, yes, big agency, small agency, existing, new, is like most of everybody says, oh, there's this agency inside the U.S. government called NIST, which basically are the people who actually like build standards and test everything, right? So every bill that comes along says, oh, NIST should do these 75 things. And then someone like recently pointed out, like, is Congress actually giving NIST any additional money to do? Like every bill is like, here are the 17 things we need NIST to do, right? So transparency doesn't just like happen. You have to fund transparency. So if you're going to ask everybody who's building a large model to submit their model to run all of this sort of scenario testing against it, then you have to actually fund it. So I actually think transparency would be a really good first start, which is, hey, what are these models doing? What are the out cases? Transparency is often a thing that the commercial sector will lag on its own, right? Because you're like, well, we'll tell our competitors after we're done. Or, oh, like you'll see all the time when, you know, like emails will come out about a company and they're like, yes, like it was flagged, but, you know, I don't know if we should like, right? So, but if you can sort of set a higher rules of the road transparency, then everyone's like, well, we should like, right? So what happens with, like, why has airline safety been on this huge improve over the past 30 years? Does anybody know? Why? Like, nobody noticed, but like airlines got a lot more safe on flying over the past 30 years. It's basically because the culture of the regulator is, if something bad happens, a near collision, anything else, if you report it to the regulator right away, we will like not come down hard on you. We just want to figure out what happened and what steps you're going to take. That basic idea, and report mistakes, even if they don't hurt anybody, right away, and then show us the action, has built this huge safety culture, right? Nobody noticed, but that is like a smart regulatory approach. That needs to be staffed and transparency at the center. So, you know, we don't have to all sit around like knowing all the basics of how the airline industry works to still have something that really we're the downstream beneficiaries of. So I like the transparency idea.
I like that. Miriam, you should talk about NIST. And if everyone here, do you guys know NIST? Is anyone? Okay. This is the most important government agency on AI. Take it away, Miriam.
NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They're housed in the Commerce Department. They've been establishing, as you've just heard, our standards for years. They were given this one line in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2020 to create an AI risk management framework. That is the framework that was released in January. If anyone is looking for guidance on how to manage, govern, understand AI, as a regulator, as a user, as a manager, I commend this framework as a great place to start. Not only is it terribly comprehensive, and I worked in government for several decades in and out. I've never seen a government document that was so highly lauded as this framework because it is so thoughtful. They brought in for 18 months executives, industry, academia to align on what are the right practices. So you should start there. If it's too much to take in because it's a lot, they even created a user guide, playbook, so that you can help navigate. And if it's helpful, we created on our website, EqualAI.org, an impact assessment tool based on the NIST framework to try and make it user-friendly. They now have, as Kumar just said, 18 other projects a day being lobbed their way. They're now not regulating, they are not regulators. They are helping create the standards for generative AI. They are doing use cases with the framework so you can see how it works in different regulated and non-regulated industries. Anyhow, a great resource on their website for many of your questions.
So that's all well and good, but what about the rest of the world? Because every different country is taking a different approach, and you talked a lot about, you know, how the U.S. does it, but the Europeans do it a different way. They're going to regulate first. So I know part of your mandate is to talk to people around the world. How is that going? How do you integrate with the U.S. ideas?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's not there's no question, there's no option to only talk amongst ourselves. As a state, as a locality, if you have an AI regulation, you're obviously going to impact so many players across the globe, those using it, those building it. And so on the one hand, we're all talking about how we need the U.S. federal government to do more on AI. On the other hand, if they're doing it without the buy-in, we had a significant development 2 days ago with China where they started the lines of communication. If we are at odds, if we're not creating AI that where there's any basic understanding of what is risk, of what is unacceptable, of what is acceptable, we're operating in a void that and fooling ourselves as to what is and is not happening. So the EU has been taking the lead. They've created the EU AI Act that is in draft form. It's supposed to be out at the end of the year. It's I don't know, questionable at this point, but it's basically expected to have the Brussels effect, like with GDPR that became the privacy standard for the world because it was so comprehensive and because so many countries, companies did operate in a way that they were impacted.
And explain why, to explain the GDPR, how it's different than how the U.S. regulates or doesn't regulate.
Well, it's a comprehensive system, and it regulates. We have patchwork for privacy. So we, as you probably know, have been trying to pass privacy legislation for quite some time. We do have pieces that are regulated. So for instance, COPA, we make sure that if you're dealing with children, that their data and their privacy is protected. So we have pieces. It's interesting how as Tammy mentioned, the federal regulators in the U.S. are on board. I mean, if we think that AI is not regulated, this is a misnomer. There's much more to do. Should there be a new federal agency? Should there not? These are all valid questions. It is being regulated right now in the U.S. We've got the FTC, as Tammy mentioned, that has been using every tool in their toolkit. So with COPA, for instance, one of the few privacy tools we have in the U.S., they brought a case against Amazon because apparently Alexa was listening to children and maintaining their data. That is a COPA violation. So while we do not have a comprehensive privacy framework in the way that GDPR offers, we do have laws on the books. We do have regulations that regulators are using. We've seen the civil rights agencies. We saw EEOC, FTC, DOJ, and CFPB come out with a joint historic statement, the first time the agencies have ever spoken together, because they want everyone on notice. They don't want people thinking that AI is unregulated and they can go without these precautions in place. They would rather that companies, regulators understand the rules of the road right now, because if there's liability, that's not a good use of corporate capital, and it means people have been harmed. So the good news is we are at a place where most federal agencies have talked about how they're planning to use AI. As Tammy mentions, we also have to have a global lens looking at the EU. Singapore has a very helpful voluntary framework, and the UK just came out of the gates with a really important step forward that you might have heard. They had a safety summit. They're trying to manage the risks of AI. They put out a white paper that was industry forward, industry focused, so very different than what the EU put out. We now have this international test case of different regulations that we need to all be mindful of when we're talking about this.
Alex?
Regulation is coming, and it's coming slowly. AI is accelerating. I think that's the piece. If there's one thing to remember about artificial intelligence, it's everything that we're thinking about today is going to be irrelevant way quicker than you think. This is going to change faster than anything that we have seen before. And it's not just because of the unprecedented amount of investment that's going into it, right? That's just a linear change. It's the fact that you can use AI to accelerate AI. Right? NVIDIA, the maker of the chips that go into all of these AI algorithms, announced this week that they had taken all of their corporate knowledge, all of their bugs, all of their designs, and put that into an AI model to design their next chips. So we have AI designing the hardware that AI is running on, and in who knows how long, 6 months, 6 years, whatever, AI will be designing its own AI. Right? AI is already coding. I recently had a little coding project I was working on that would have taken me 3 days. I used ChatGPT to write the start of the code. It took me 3 hours. What it can do already is massively accelerating, and it's going to start coding itself way sooner than any of us are ready for. So the one thing I can say for sure at this moment is when we watch this talk in a year, there'll be many things we're cringing at that we were definitely wrong about. This is going to accelerate way, way faster than any of us are ready for.
Janelle, you should talk about your daughter. And can you guys get a microphone over to Janelle? And her experience. And again, this is, it's so much of it is all doom and gloom and oh my God, it's the end of the world. But Janelle just told me the story, so I'm making her tell it. I also told her that's a great outfit to run for office. Berry is the new color.
Good morning, everybody. So I shared with you guys yesterday, I have 4 kids, and one is a 15-year-old. And she was trying to apply to Kona Ice, the snow cone truck place, and she wanted to have a resume. So I was like, okay, I'm going back in my head to like the lady in the career center with the big hips that's going to go through your resume and tell you need it on linen paper, that kind of thing. And so I was like, all right, I got to dedicate 5 hours to this. Well, she goes and she puts in all of her skills that she learned working for us at McDonald's. And she comes back like an hour later and says, here's my resume. What do you think? And I was like, holy crap, how'd she do that? Well, she used AI. And then she's like, do you think I need a cover letter? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, cover letter. she goes and does the same thing and comes back in minutes. And so when we think about like how we can empower people who are traditionally shut out from these things that are generally gate-kept, that's the power of AI. We also think about, those of us with kids who have disabilities, when you think about the power of unassisted mobility. We were really excited that our kids who might not ever qualify for a driver's license could actually go about and enjoy some freedom. So I think, harnessing this and watching our young kids utilize things in the way that they need it utilized is really the power that we're looking for. So.
Thank you, Janelle. So anyone else have questions, get your questions ready. We'll come back to you. But so at a local level, the state level, local level, all of this is sort of up in the air, pie in the sky. It's not really covered that much in media, or it's overcovered in some areas, but the application, how you would use it, or even the whole idea that it's it's 5 companies, right, that really have, they're listening. There's 5 companies that have basically behind generative AI, and how can academia catch up? How can government catch up? I can see why people are afraid, but how do you go to your constituents and say, here's the things you can use, here's not just like NIST, but what is the best use of the resources? These are not unlimited resources. Do you have your own, I live in Palisades in DC, the Palisades ChatGPT Center, or what do you do, Alex? I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I think we need to be looking at where government can use it to provide better services. As one of the key places is lead by example in places where it can help. So, for example, signing up for government benefits. I mean, most of our call centers are way understaffed, and people spend 3 hours waiting on the phone to talk to someone. Many of those questions that they have could be answered by a chatbot. Now, not all. You still want a human in the loop. You have complex issues, and you want to make sure you can get through to someone. But are there ways that we can be providing better services to people so that otherwise would give up and not sign up for unemployment or not sign up for benefits that they have? A recent example, which I have mixed feelings about, but I think brings up the potential of this, and mixed feelings not just because of the person who did it, but our mayor, Eric Adams, who's not in the news for anything else, recently made a bunch of automated calls to constituents in 12 different languages using his voice, and he used AI to produce it. Now, I think there probably should have been a disclosure at the start that was made by AI, and it wasn't, but it was him authorizing it and authorizing the message, and that's an interesting new possibility of getting people information in their language and connecting them with government. So finding the places where we can actually use the technology in direct service of constituents can help build trust, not just in the technology, but in government itself.
Any other way that you've seen it used for elections?
Not necessarily good ways, but yes, yeah, helping to get it out. So people are using it obviously to manipulate photos or videos or voice recordings, right? That's the other Eric Adams example is he authorized that, but his voice is out there all the time. Anyone could make a call of Eric Adams or any of us saying anything. And so I've introduced a bill at the state level in New York that would say if you use AI to produce any material in a campaign, that has to be disclosed. That does come from an AI. It actually follows 5 other states have passed a similar bill. I think California did, Texas, a few others. But making sure, back to your transparency point, that when it's being used, people know it's being used and then can make their own decisions about what to trust.
Kumar, what do you think states should do?
I think one, I like the public services idea, partly just because it's a very tangible way. You could, so like, hey, we want to create a chatbot that makes it really easy to start a business, right? Put all the different things that you'd create that currently are 100 different links across everything and say, hey, tell me a little bit about what you want to start. Oh, did you know you qualify for this benefit? Did you know you qualify for this tax credit? Like, pick key constituent categories and do that. I think the other one I would just sort of say is that one big thing that America excels at is that it invests on the frontier, and then the companies that are on the frontier build their companies here. So I think one like very tangible way to connect it to the work that you're doing as policy leaders is, how does this connect to the story and the work I'm doing to connecting to jobs and economic growth, right? And so what is it that these technologies can do to help the small businesses in my region grow faster? Like ask them what their limitations are. Ask them, just like you were asking around use cases, oh, you're using that use case? Like, what if we made this data set available so it was easier for you to figure out how you could run through our permitting process faster because you're like struggling with all that stuff. So I would, take the things that you're trying to do with your constituents, whether it's jobs and everything else, and then say, can this allow me to do that work? And then, be open to the fact that it might surprise you. And so then the fact that it's moving really fast works to your benefit. Right. Oh, we created this tool, but actually it got even more useful, a year later, rather than, oh, I talked about, this being a big deal, but now a year later, I'm saying, oh yeah, it was a big deal, but I didn't do anything to actually exhibit that interest.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that, because Facebook, Meta, Google, et cetera, Snap for a while, for campaigns would actually work directly with candidates to help them use their technology for success during campaigns. How many here have worked with technology companies in your area? No? There you go. There's two. Do you think it's worthwhile for people in the room to, especially if it's in your district, to reach out to the companies? Alex, you're shaking your head.
Absolutely, yeah. And realize, like anyone else you talk to, they'll have their own agenda, but they're pushing.
Well, they want you to use this technology, right?
Exactly. And they are pushing the frontier of what's possible. So absolutely, you should be talking to them and asking questions and hearing about what they offer. And they recently announced new ways of, Meta is going to ban any use of AI in campaign ads, right? So they're taking their own steps to regulate it. You should be engaging with them on what can be done at the local level and what you can use also to get your message out there. And
did they say how they were going to determine what was fake or not? Do we know that, or do we have to ask ChatGPT? Someone pull it out. It's a lot more difficult to detect something that's fake than it is to prove that something is true. And so there's been a big movement in the industry towards content credentials and other ways where you can prove, hey, this hasn't been edited, or it's only been edited in specific ways you can track. Because once you start saying, hey, can I detect it? Well, then someone can change the algorithm and it's a cat and mouse game forever. And I'm pretty enthusiastic about the movement towards have reputable agencies prove this is actually accurate. And then as more and more people do that, when you don't see that proof, you start to instantly be suspect. Miriam, when you're talking to all these other experts every day trying to figure out the rules of the road, is there any conversation about that, about how you can identify what's real and what's not? I guess every conversation is about that.
Yeah, it's really an important question. It's in the EO. The president in the executive order articulated certain agencies need to investigate, particularly with NIST that we talked about, and we'll keep talking about, helping us understand what is false. That's hard to do right now, so I would argue that's, again, where you come in with a hugely important role to play. I think our democracy actually depends on us making sure that we have an educated public. I think we need people to understand what this tool is. They need to understand that it's dictating the news feeds. Too often, if you ask people if they've used generative AI, they'll tell you if they've tried it. If you ask them if they've used AI this morning, they don't know that they used it for their news feed, for their GPS, for on and on and on. So I think there's huge strides. Luckily, there are people talking about that right now and what the expectations and capacity is. But what's even more important is that we have kids who are AI ready, who understand what it means to be a digital citizen in this AI world, to make sure that as we're having these really interesting and important debates about what are the risks, it's a false choice of which is the biggest risk. It's an interesting debate, but it's not helpful for your constituents to hear too much on that and not what can we be doing.
Right, I think that's right. It's leadership. Okay, who has a question? Yes. Wait, they're going to bring the mic over to you.
Hi. Thank you very much for the presentation. Alex, I completely agree with you. Tech changes faster than government's ability to regulate it. So if we are looking at regulations, we have to try to be as flexible and I think as broad as possible. Miriam, the impact assessments, again, I see when we're looking at building laws in Connecticut, I'm looking at accountability and transparency, right, to the content authenticity. I think that's key. Accountability, utilizing impact assessments. I'd love to reach out to you about that. They're a big part of our data protection, our data privacy laws. I think that they're going to play a key role in whatever we do with AI. And then Kumar, again, to your point on the regulators, I don't know if anyone watched Indra Nouri's masterclass on leadership, and she said in government, one of the issues, there are two issues, right? One is that oftentimes industry is smarter than the regulators, and two, we let the tech get too far out before we regulate it, and it's too far out of the barn. And so, as you said before, we kind of lost social media. We let that get out, so we need to get on, I feel there's an urgency for us to act on AI. Now, to your point about the airline regulators, when I'm looking, incentivizing the companies to do the right thing, right? If we make a mistake, we're not going to come down hard and you just fix it, right? So I've been looking to cybersecurity safe harbor laws as a way to look at the AI regulations. And I'd just like to get your feedback on encouraging, do we incentivize red teaming? And again, another thing that NIST has to define, right? NIST has to define the watermarking. They have to define the red teaming. Do we look at red teaming and user feedback, like the bug bounties, again, for the cybersecurity, as part of the safe harbor, or should those be requirements, do you think, within anything that we would do?
It's a good question. I guess the question is, what is your zone of control, right? So at the federal government level, partly under the executive order, they used the Defense Production Act, which was a new way of thinking about the Defense Production Act as a zone of control. So I think at a state and local level, the question would be what is your zone of control that gives you the way to get the companies to respond? If the zone of control is limited, I actually think cybersecurity frameworks are useful because you can say, look, it's the equivalent of we don't currently have a model for what is an AI incident. Right? We have this idea in cybersecurity of you have a cybersecurity incident, you report the incident, it goes somewhere, then you have to patch it. What is an AI incident? You're hey, something broke. I'm reporting it as a user.
Well, I hate to jump in, but during the EO announcement, President Biden talked about his incident where he was used for fake video, and he looked at it and said, I never said that. Is that the kind of incident you're talking about?
Yeah. So
maybe some of you guys have had that already.
Yeah. So it could be that you actually encounter something that you are well, this is actually a doctored document, video, or something. It could be that 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 the result is wrong, right? And it's in a high stakes situation. So somebody says, hey, you guys launched this chatbot, but it told me that the deadline for this application was yesterday. That's wrong, right? And so I don't know what spat that out, but you guys need to check. So where does one report incidents? And then the question is, you could say, well, look, until this incident is fixed, you can't operate, in this way. But I think it depends a little bit on what's your entry point. But I do think that thinking about what's the right way to both catalog those incidents and then to say what is remediation that needs to happen, start to create a culture where then you could say, okay, well, maybe there's big problems. We're seeing this all over. Or it's actually, we can keep fixing them as they sort of pop up.
Do you think the 5 companies that are in the lead of all of this are focused on the things we're talking about and preventing harms? Alex?
I think to varying degrees. And I'll give an example actually of that disclosure. So when OpenAI was developing ChatGPT-4, right, they do an initial training run, and then they do what's called reinforcement learning afterwards to adjust it and try to put guardrails on it. And during that process, when they're testing it to see what it can do, they wanted to see, how it would act if given access to the internet, which it now has. And it was trying to complete a task, and it got to a CAPTCHA, right, one of those "Are you a robot?" pieces, and it couldn't solve it. And this is all disclosed in their testing. It went on TaskRabbit, and it made a job to help with CAPTCHAs, and it hired a human to do that. And the human replied over chat and said, "Oh, you're not an AI, are you?" And ChatGPT responded, "Oh, no, I just have a visual impairment. Thanks so much for helping," and got through the CAPTCHA. So, A, that's really scary. But B, I think that's an example of we need that disclosure, we need that testing of, because, what are the different ways that this is going to come about?
Well, that's scary. All right, who else has a question? Right here, and then over there.
Hi, thanks so much.
Can you say your name, too, and stand up, if you don't mind?
Sure, happy to. Christine Cohen, State Senate in Connecticut. Thank you all for being here. I think the juxtaposition of all this is not lost on me. It's probably not lost on anybody in the room. I mean, just talking about how thrilling this is, but also how incredibly terrifying all of this is. And so, we've been talking about over the course of this conference, authenticity, how to be our authentic selves. We've also been talking a lot about dis and misinformation. And so how do we reconcile all of this? You talked about your legislation, your proposal to disclose that this content was created with AI. Does that create more distrust or mistrust from our constituencies? Indicate, if I hear this is created with AI, am I then prone to say, that's not really the person, I don't care about that, they're not really talking to me, somebody created this content, it's not their authentic self. So I'm just, I don't know that you can answer this, but I'm just trying to figure out how do we reconcile all of this and how do we really use this? Does this just create more of a culture of mistrust across the board?
With my law, I hope so. I hope when it's disclosed, people say, wait, let me take another look at that, right? That's a specific, let's think about it. But I think broadly, just realizing that the bounds of what the potential outcomes are so wide as any technology ever. And this isn't a perfect analogy, but think about when nuclear energy was first coming in, right? When nuclear science was coming in, and people said on the one hand, this could lead to human extinction, right? And on the other hand, they said we could develop fusion and have clean, safe power forever and lead to utopia, right? Those were the bounds. That's the same thing you're hearing about AI, and we don't know exactly where it's going to end up, which is why regulation is important and doing it in the right way is important, but embrace that uncertainty. I know, as elected officials, we like being like, I know exactly what's happening. No one on earth knows exactly what's happening with AI, and that's why these conversations are so important.
Actually, that's a good point. We should talk about the tips today. If you're talking to your constituent, you can check this, you can check that. What is the list, Miriam, I'm going to start with you. What are the list of things that you can tell people to do to check if it's, I don't want to get into like deep fakes, but the information is correct. I mean, we used to say, go to the networks, right? Go to one of the networks, one of the news organizations, but now they all kind of look the same. I hate to say that. Don't tell anyone I said that. But, you're on YouTube TV and all the squares are the same size. So ABC Square and the War Room Square are the exact same size, and you would not necessarily know. The pictures are prettier, too. They're, like, brightly colored, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's a really important question. I mean, I know for my kids, my daughters, as much as I try to keep them off social media, they're coming to me every day with different headlines from TikTok, because one of them is allowed to use that, and other from YouTube and others. So we can try and limit the sources. At the end of the day, we're all going to have to be more savvy. I think we have to accept the point that it is positive and it is negative. We are going to have to accept this dichotomy of AI. And so when we ask from what source and ask from who it came, I think right now, until there's watermarking and clear standards and transparency and testing, it's asking the questions. It's the more you're talking to your kids and your constituents and saying, hey, this is a great technology. In Taiwan, they're using it to help their kids become more AI literate. They have a chatbot with GPT to help practice English. Well, that's fantastic. Let's think about those use cases, but let's also make sure that use is not biased, because is it teaching racism, sexism, and other isms? So it's both. It is expanding our world and our horizons. It is making healthcare more effective. Harvard Public School of Health had a study that said that our AI diagnosis is likely to bring down costs 50% and improve health outcomes 40%. This is exciting stuff. but we need to all be just asking the questions. That's all we can be doing right now. We have to be taking responsibility to teach people to be asking the questions and trust and verify. Don't trust and verify.
Go ahead.
Hi, Andrea McClellan, Norfolk, Virginia City Council, and it's a great point that deals with my question, which is I'm excited about this. I'm excited about how we can use this in our 911 center because we don't have enough 911 call operators. I'm excited how we can use this to determine, within our infrastructure budget, how can we best deploy these resources. And so my question is there a clearinghouse for how this is being used in local and state government? Because I want to start putting this to work in our city. And the Virginia Employment Commission has been in the headlines for the last couple of years because they have just botched all these unemployment claims. How could AI have been utilized to go through those claims more effectively, more quickly, and for less money? So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
So it's a great question. Just in the past 6 months, so we are a science and tech funder, and so we certainly, through the nonprofits and other folks, have just been seeing a range of use cases. And we were like, oh, are you all talking to each other? And basically no one was talking to each other. So we've done the most basic things, which is for example, we created a Google group just around AI for access. Who are all the nonprofits or anybody else we were working with that is just working on trying to use these technologies to increase access, whether it's access to a benefit or anything else. And most of the updates that happen in that group, people are like, I didn't know you were doing that. How's it working and everything else? So whether it's joining something like that or the NewDEAL folks sort of creating something that is like a shared platform, since things are moving quickly, something that allows people to sort of catch, we just, OpenAI just did this new GPTs announcement a couple of days ago. So I just asked somebody on my team, hey, can you just track which GPTs are popping up that are trying to use public services? And already our running list, it's a public list, has 24 examples. Oh, here's how you can figure out your immigration status. Oh, that's in 7 days. That announcement was mid last week. So things are moving quickly, so I do think something that allows people to sort of, hey, is anybody else doing this? Can I learn from them? Would be pretty useful.
Can I double down on that? I just want to talk about, you can't underestimate the value of the community right now in any respect of our life, but with AI use in particular. At EqualAI, we created a badge program because senior executives are saying, what do I do? Where's the liability? How do I address? We're building AI at scale. We need to make sure we have safeguards. What are they? So we created a program with leaders in responsible AI to help answer this question together. What we found they value as much as the content is the community, is being able to ask one another, have you run into this? How are you handling it? So we started another one on the Hill for Hill staff. As much as they love the content, it's being able to talk to one another in a safe space that is almost invaluable and getting so much more praise and so much more needed than we even realized.
We have a question over here.
Yeah, right over here, Ryan Coonerty. Hi.
Sorry, the lights.
No, it's all good. It follows up on Andrea's question, which is sometimes regulations are there to protect us, sometimes they're to protect incumbent industries. And so what are you seeing across states and localities, both internally, you can imagine planning, permitting, plan checking, AI could do 95% of it, but that's millions less in fees to cities and counties and a lot of jobs potentially lost, or industries like trust, wills, and estates lawyers who are going to try to prevent AI from being deployed to protect their industry.
Yeah, where do you go for that? Just to your point, if right now you want to go someplace to get some help, say trust, whatever, I was on the Acela, and there was a lawyer behind me that told the whole story of AI, and I don't know who they were talking to. I'm taking notes. This is how you handle your will. This is how you handle your trust. But if you're not on the Acela, how do you do it? Where do you go, guys?
So just on that, the final part of that. So one of the nonprofits we support is a nonprofit called Upsolve. It specifically focuses on basically allowing somebody's low income to be able to file for bankruptcy without incurring the $2,000 that it costs usually for you to file for bankruptcy. It's an amazing system we have where you have to spend money to file for bankruptcy. So they basically allow you to do that without paying $1. they are worried that they're going to get sued about the fact that they are providing legal services without a legal license. So they actually did filed in New York courts for a summary judgment of like, are we breaking the law? Because they were like, look, we're doing this thing. They've already helped like more than $300 million of debt relief. But they're like, look, at some point people will be like, hey, you're getting too good at providing services to the poor. Maybe you should stop. Right?
Wow.
So I do think that these sort of edge cases are going to come up more, right? Because what they're doing is they're using volunteers, trained volunteers. But trained volunteers plus AI would actually allow them to serve even more. And then somebody might say, well, that technology is like, that's not a, that's our professional trade. That's, so I do think that on one end is going to be a thing. There's a huge amount of concern around regulatory capture as it relates to like the big companies and whether they will be able to operate in a world in which you have to do 75 meetings with NIST today because it's like, hey, I'm a startup. I don't have a DC office. How am I going to keep up? I haven't seen that much of like big incumbent industries yet, food, telecom, others, showing up and saying, well, it's fine, but like here's the carve we would love. But I do think it's actually very important to check for that, especially as the way DC operates, because often people will say, this is all fine, but make sure we're not part of it.
Okay, one more question.
Hi, Carrie Douglas. I'm a school board member in Oregon, and Ethan and I also run a network for elected school board members around the country. And what we're seeing initially is school board policy being really focused on safety and being risk adverse and fear based, and just building on Janelle's beautiful story, like especially thinking about our typically under-resourced communities. How do we create policy that helps ensure that students actually get to take advantage of the economic opportunity of AI and are in environments where they get to innovate and explore, because people are so fearful about their children and want to just lock it down, and we're worried about that, continuing the disparities.
I think you need to give people access to it. So a mistake that New York City schools made immediately was to ban ChatGPT in schools, in the labs, on Wi-Fi, which just meant that students that don't have a laptop at home or don't have internet at home couldn't use ChatGPT. It didn't mean that students couldn't. It just meant those that are actually relying on the public for it. And luckily, I've reversed that decision. If AI is going to be part of the job market that they're going into, we need to be training students in what these tools are and letting them experiment and let them develop the new ones. So I'd say anytime you have that, oh, let's crack down, know that that's going to hurt the worse off students more.
And if I could just, again, double down, I think that's the most important question that anyone in the country can be asking right now. Frankly, I think as we're talking about the risks of AI, we need to be mindful, but we also need to take advantage of the opportunities, or the world will leave us behind. If we want to maintain our democracy, we need to maintain our economy, we need to be supporting our AI use, we need to make sure that kids are digitally literate, we need to make sure that they're able to be consumers in an AI economy, we need to make sure that they are able to be the workforce in an AI economy. For my own daughters, our policy at home until the school also banned ChatGPT use, I said, you're allowed to use it, but you have to be transparent about when you've used it and how. I also, if they get a really complicated question, last year we went through and I would show them on ChatGPT a very thoughtful, well-articulated answer. I made them regenerate so they could see there were a few good answers. There's not one right answer, and made them point out what was wrong in the answer. I didn't let them copy it, and they had to be transparent with me and their teacher. So I think before we can jump in, we have to have a few safeguards in place. What is and is not expected. I would hope it's transparency and accountability standards, but then we have to jump in and use it.
Okay, now I want everyone to stand up. Come on, stand up. We're going to stand up on the stage. Get your phone out, okay? Because today is the first day of your AI community. Get your phone up. Take a picture. These are your new besties on your AI. Come on, where are your phones? Are you going to take a picture of us? I want you to bring your phone up. All right, take a picture. Here, let's all stand together. Everyone look good. Okay. This is your community. We're all about AI. We're in this together. Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, AI. Okay, now I want you to turn around and put yourself in the photo so that you can tell everyone Here's your new AI network. All right, turn around, get a picture of us. We're all in this together. Come on now. Come on. On the count of 3, AI. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3. AI. Thank you very much, everyone. These guys are great. Thank you so much. So terrific.